Hey everybody, how's it going? Stwida here, coming at you with another SWGOH video. Today we are jumping on the YouTube clickbait cringe train, and we are making a Galactic Legend GAC tier list. This is strictly my opinion, although my opinion is based on a healthy amount of experience and obsessive research, and some SWGOH.gg data. So take that with what you will. I'll be splitting this up into two different sections. There is going to be a section where I consider the GL's power without their lifter, and there's going to be a section where I consider the GL's power with their lifter. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so the first one that I want to start with is GL Ahsoka, and I'm just setting her in B. This is not where she's going to live. I'm going to talk about her for a sec. GL Ahsoka, there's a little asterisk here. She's one of the few who I'm going to say she lands in the same spot with a lifter or without a lifter. And the reason for that is CG has been doing this thing lately that I don't agree with, where they come out with a character and they say that that character is a lifter, like even before the entire team has been announced. And to me, the whole point of a lifter is to take a team that already existed and was performing at a certain level, and then switch out a member of that team, and now the team is lifted from where they were to where they are, and they can do new and better things, and it kind of revamps the entire team. So I'm calling this out because Ezra Bridger Exile is described as a Galactic Legend Ahsoka lifter, but he's very clearly just meant to be on the team. Her kit specifically calls him out, and while he does happen to work on other teams, he's part of the core 5 of GLA's team. So I'm not calling him a lifter. I am saying he is one of the standard members of the GLA team, and as soon as you take him away, her team just gets worse, and you're replacing him with someone who wasn't meant to be one of the core 5 members of her team. So, with that being said, this is, even though this is the non-lifter tier, I am considering her with Ezra, and as such, she goes in S tier. When she has Ezra, she has like 3 reliable counters, those being Leia, Slicker with Darkside Rey, and Sith Eternal and Bane. And some of those don't even have like amazing win rates. I think Sith Eternal Bane is at like 70%, and it doesn't even work in 3v3, or it's just really low in 3v3. The point is, a team that has that few counters, reliable counters, it just demands S tier, right? If you have GLA, your opponent effectively needs one of 3 teams in the entire game, who, by the way, are all extremely powerful teams, and even if they're required to beat GLA, that's a win for you because you've just taken out one of their most expensive, luxurious teams, right? If a team basically demands one of 3, or else you just get stuck on it, that's it. That's where this whole thing ends, right? This tier list, by the way, is not in consideration of only on defense or only on attack. It's overall. And because of that, defense just has a heavier weight than offense, in my opinion. Defense, you have the potential to get infinite holds, right? They can keep trying and trying and trying, and they can keep losing and losing and losing. When you take a team on offense, at best, all that team is going to do for you is get through one team. So that can be very useful, but there's, to me, there's just no denying. Ahsoka might be boring, she might be expensive, but she commands respect on defense. She is S tier on defense, and that's all there is to it. You can't change my mind. Moving on. All right, next up, we are moving on to Jabba. I will drop him in B again, just for discussion's sake. Jabba is really good, and I I don't want to talk about the fact that he is arguably the best GL from a resource perspective. It's hard to talk about Jabba without talking about Smuggler's Run 2 and what Jabba does for your mod game. Like, there's just nothing better than Jabba for resources, but we're just talking about GAC. Now, that being said, Jabba is really good in GAC, honestly, on defense and offense. You see him more frequently on defense, and I do think he brings more value on defense, but depending on where you're at with your roster, Jabba can beat Leia with relative ease, okay? So if you're someone who doesn't have a Leia of your own, or you just don't have an answer for a Leia, or maybe just the way the GAC is kind of falling out, you need those answers for something else, you can take Jabba on offense and beat a Leia. Now, I'm not so familiar with all of his other offensive uses because people don't really take him on offense, and neither do I. But I have posted a video of him very easily beating Leia with her optimal team that a lot of people don't even necessarily use. But he can be used on offense, and I want to call that out because you almost always see him on defense. So he is far from worthless. And he basically beats any non-GL team. I mean, if you look at his counters, pretty much the only non-GL team that beats him is Night Sisters, and it's a gimmick. And if you're using him on offense, the AI is too stupid to abuse that gimmick. So really, if it's a non-GL team, Jabba's just gonna win, right? So that's good. On defense, he doesn't have as many or as few counters as something like GLA, but the counters are still relatively limited, right? Lots of people like to use JMK on him. Lots of people like to use Lord Vader. Lots of people like to use Slicker. And honestly, out of all of those, Lord Vader is the least valuable. And that's still a galactic legend, right? Like, if you can command a galactic legend to be pulled to beat you on defense, that's pretty good. Yes, there is the gimmicky Night Sister counter. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You need it to line up perfectly. It's not super consistent, and I don't love that. I'm not going to say that Jabba gets dropped down a tier because sometimes a gimmick beats him on defense, right? He's still really, really good, but on defense, the reality is the teams that you need, typically, to beat him are less expensive, less valuable, and more accessible than the teams that you need to beat something like GL Ahsoka. And because of that, and because of his use on offense, I say he gets placed in the A tier. It's not as devastating when you see a Jabba on defense as it is when you see a GLA on defense. This is much more concerning, and that's why he falls a tier lower. All right, next up is JMK. We're going to talk about him in the B tier for a second. So, JMK is very interesting. I don't think JMK gets the respect that he necessarily deserves. And I think one of the reasons that people don't talk about JMK that much is because it's a pretty straightforward answer, and everyone kind of does the same thing for JMK. And there's a new addition to the game that kind of ruins him on defense, even though a lot of people don't have it yet. We'll get there, right? On offense, JMK is amazing. JMK can beat Leia. JMK walks all over Jabba. Not Ahsoka, sadly. But there are few teams in the game that JMK does not just absolutely walk on defense, or, if you take him on offense. He's basically a free I win button wherever you take him aside from a few teams. So on offense, I really have no complaints with JMK. On defense, this is where people go, oh, he's not that good on defense. So the problem with JMK is that he has this reputation for not being great on defense. And so a lot of people take him on offense. Well, here's the thing. One of the best ways to beat JMK is with JMK. The mirror match is extremely easy because of the way the AI plays it when it's on defense. And you can kind of just use that to your advantage to play better than the AI and get a free win, right? And so because so many people take JMK on offense, if you put yours on defense, like, yeah, that's great, you pulled a JMK, but the main point is he's not tripping anybody up, right? If you have a JMK on offense and you see a JMK on defense, worst case scenario, okay, I'll just JMK that. Like, it's not a curveball. It's not that crazy to deal with. But in the grand scheme of things, I am placing him at the A tier, because if you look at the data for JMK, once again, he has very few consistent counters. Yes, you know what? Inquisitors can do it with Reva, right? Yes, Balin Skull walks all over him. Yes. But again, those are very valuable non-GL teams. If my JMK pulls the Reva, if my JMK pulls the Balin, that's just not the worst trade in the world, right? Reva has a ton of other uses on offense. Balin has a ton of other uses on offense. I am not mad if my GL pulls an S tier non-GL team, right? To some extent, he has done his job. If he pulls another JMK, he's kind of done his job, right? And so, yeah, there are some other gimmicky counters. JML can do it, but you have to know what you're doing. Sith Eternal can do it, but it requires a very specific lineup, and you kind of need some things to land the way that you need them to. But other than that, you don't just look at a JMK on defense and go, wow, that's so easy. I'm not going to have to think about that at all. And the reality is he is the kind of team that you see on defense where if you don't have one of the answers, you're not getting through. His team is not one that you can kind of just walk your way through and well, I'll throw like 5 different teams at him and I'll slowly whittle them down. No, his team is one where you kind of beat them or you don't, and there's really not a middle ground. JMK is also, don't hate me for this, I know, it's like I'm invalidating the 2 list. JMK is also like GL Ahsoka in the sense that I am not counting Commander Ahsoka Tano as a lifter for him. Commander Ahsoka Tano is effectively demanded on the JMK team. The JMK team is so bad without Commander Ahsoka Tano, and she was released with the intent of being on the JMK team. Yes, she lifts his team, but there's no world that exists where you should be using that team without her. And again, I'm not trying to cheap out there, but she was released with the intent of being on his team originally, right? That's not a lifter. That's a core member of the team. So if you want to fight me on that, you can, but I'm not calling her a lifter. I'm calling her a mandatory member of the team under all circumstances. Moving on. Okay, so next up we're going to talk about JML. JML is, he's an interesting one. Again, remember this is in the context of GAC. I don't care that he's one of the best characters for Conquest. My entire Star Wars experience revolves around GAC. Most of my content revolves around GAC. We're talking about GAC. And my goodness, the reality is just that he sits right about here without his lifter, okay? Now, JML, unlike some of the other characters that I've talked about, he truly does have a lifter, right? He had his original team, and then Jedi Knight Cal Kestis was released later on, and it was kind of advertised as a JML lifter. And Cal Kestis really does take the JML team to another level. Cal Kestis is like the reason that JML can do some of the crazier things like beating Leia in 5v5 on offense. Without Cal, who was released after the original JML team and who does truly elevate JML, he really does change the team in a meaningful way, right? Without Cal, there are some things that you can still do that Cal makes easier, but they're harder, they're scarier. It's just, JML is one of those GLs in GAC where it's like you see him on defense and it's like, okay, I don't know, I'll figure it out. Something's gonna whittle him away. You can beat him with a Sith trio team. You can beat him with Traya, right? You can beat him with random non-GL teams like Bo-Katan. Mandalore is going to take him out. Balin's going to take him out. And like, yes, I'm talking about expensive non-GL teams, but this isn't like Ahsoka where it's like there's 3 teams in the game, right? JML, there are a lot of things that can beat him without his lifter when he's on defense. And because of that, he loses a lot of value on defense, because the more things that could beat him on defense, the higher the chance that your opponent is going to just accidentally have those things as they're building their roster, and they see a JML on defense and they go, yeah, okay, no big deal. That's easy for me to walk on. So really, I feel like there's not a lot to talk about there, right? Like JML without his lifter, gosh, GLA, it's not happening. Jabba, it's absolutely not happening, even with a lifter, to be honest. But JMK, not very experienced with it, but it's kind of dicey with Cal, so I don't even want... I'm not going to say it's impossible without Cal. I wouldn't try it. Leia is similar. Like, unless there's a Datacron, yikes. JML, reliably, very reliably, in my opinion, can take out Lord Vader and can take out Slicker. And that's about where I stop with that. And oh, by the way, now that Slicker has Darkside Rey, if your opponent for some reason sets Slicker on defense with Darkside Rey, now that he can ignore taunt, I wouldn't be too confident in that counter anymore. At least not with a lifter, at least not without Jedi Knight Cal Kestis. So the reality is, without Cal, he's not that intimidating on defense, and he doesn't have a ton of great uses on offense. My JML right now, because I actually don't have Cal, primarily I just use him to take out like A-tier non-GL teams, honestly. I use him on Malgus from time to time. I use him on like Finn Zori Resistance from time to time. I'll use him on Qui-Gon from time to time. But those aren't really impressive teams to beat. So because of that, he lands in the C tier. Okay, so next up we're going to be talking about Galactic Legend Rey. Now, the reality is Ben Solo was released relatively long after GL Rey was released, right? So Ben Solo truly is a lifter for GL Rey, and they call out each other. Well, he calls out her in her kit, you know, quite a bit, and we all understand that dynamic, right? So I am going to assume that GL Rey's lifter is Ben Solo. Now, there's also an asterisk here, and we're going to talk about that in the lifter section. GL Rey is really weird. All her kit really cares about is light side allies. And so, to some extent, every character who's light side is kind of a lifter. Because I don't even know what her intended team was originally. I guess it would have been the Resistance team, and that is kind of what people were using when she was released. But I'm just going to cut to the chase. Without her lifters, whether that's Ben Solo or some other random light side tune that unexpectedly shows up, she's fine. On defense, especially without Ben Solo, like, Starkiller just walks on her. Even a mediocre Starkiller team with, like, average mods and maybe they're missing a Zeta or an Omicron or something like that, she just gets absolutely walked on defense. And Starkiller's a pretty common team for people to have, right? So that alone, yikes. Her without her lifters, she really opens up even JML, right? That's a great place to use your JML. She just, without her lifters, is kind of unimpressive. She's always annoying, but she's always kind of unimpressive. On offense, I think she is better on offense than she is on defense when you don't have her lifters, because you can kind of control the flow of the battle. You can control when you ult. You can pick your exact targets that you want for whirlwinds. You can bring her in with whatever gimmicky kind of team setup that you want. And you can control the flow of the battle. And that's always very good when you're taking a character on offense. In my opinion, she's also very strong when it comes up against some other Rey comps. And I feel like a lot of people don't talk about this because Rey kind of lives on defense these days. One of the easiest matchups to beat with your Rey on offense is Rey on defense. Because all you have to do is sandbag your ultimate. Don't use your ultimate until the enemy Rey uses their ultimate. And so the enemy Rey always just does 1 damage to everyone with her ultimate, and you slowly whack away their entire team with your ultimate and your whirlwinds because you have control over that, right? You're always smarter than the AI is, or you should be. But that being said, you know, I still just don't see enough use for her between offense and defense without her lifters to place her anywhere other than exactly where she is while we're talking about her in the B tier. Moving on. Moving on to Slicker. I'm sorry, I already moved him up to the B tier for talking about him. Slicker without Darkside Rey. Now, there was a little bit of controversy with Darkside Rey because some people thought Slicker was good enough. You know, he could sometimes beat Leia, and he could sometimes beat Jabba, and he could most of the time beat every non-GL team in the game, and, you know, he did well enough. In my opinion, he was an A-tier attacker. And he had some limitations, right? Like Rey could get dicey. Ironically, JML could get dicey if the AI played it right. Jedi Master Kenobi, it was like no chance, really. And even some of the other counters like Leia, the most consistent counters required a gimmicky setup with like Geonosian Brood Alpha and Armorer and making sure he got his buff. And if he didn't, you kind of lose. And so like some of it's dicey. We don't need to talk about like Sith Eternal. Because that's easy, and Lord Vader was easy as well. But prior to Darkside Rey, he really wasn't intimidating on defense. Like, you could beat him with a non-GL Jedi team, like with Revan and Jedi Knight Luke, and that could be done pretty consistently with relative ease. And that only gets easier even without JML. If you for some reason got Jedi Knight Cal Kestis and you still didn't have JML, that made it even easier. So just kind of some leftover Jedi beat him when he's on defense without his lifter. And, you know, depending on the Zetas that he has, if he doesn't have Press the Advantage, he can be beat on defense with Imperial Troopers. It's just kind of... he's not amazing on defense. And pretty much like any other GL could beat him on defense, you know, because you're just going to do better than the AI does. So... and yeah, on offense, I would call him an A-tier attacker on offense. But between attacking and defending, he's going to get the B tier for me without his lifters. That's pretty much all there is to it. Now, moving on to Sith Eternal, we drop him in B tier to talk. Sith Eternal's lifter is weird, right? Because they released Darth Bane, and he was advertised as a Sith Eternal lifter. And don't get me wrong, he is. I'm going to consider him a Sith Eternal lifter in the next list. But Bane is generally not used as a lifter with Sith Eternal because he's so valuable even without Sith Eternal. It's like together they beat everything, and separately they beat like 95% of things. So you're just not getting a lot of value by putting Bane with Sith Eternal, aside from a few specific use case scenarios, like GL Ahsoka. But the reality is, we all know the jokes, right? Like, Sith Eternal literally gets beat by Wampa on defense if you don't have the right comp set for defense. And I mean, that alone should speak volumes. He's another one who just gets beat by some A-tier non-GL teams on defense, and it's like we just don't talk about him on defense kind of at all, right? Because even with his lifter Bane, they have to be only 2, and you can't set 2 on defense. So I just never, ever, ever recommend setting him on defense. For offense, he's good, but he's gimmicky good, right? Like, he can solo Gas, he can solo Malgus, he can do a lot when you add in Watt. He has some gimmicky kind of comps where he can beat JMK, but he's fine. He kind of reminds me of JML even on offense, where it's like, yeah, he does have some valuable non-GL teams that he beats on when they're on defense, but I still say for the most part he's primarily being used as a gimmick to beat A-tier teams when they're set on defense. Like, yeah, Gas is strong, but he's not like demands an S-tier team strong. He's kind of like demands a Sith Eternal solo strong. And that's not a bad place to use Sith Eternal solo, because you're still getting really good banners for soloing a Gas. So because of that, sorry guy, you get placed in the C tier. Moving on. All right, next up is Leia, and Leia, she's one of the three, right? She's like GLA and like Kenobi. Drogon is not Leia's lifter. Drogon was released before Leia. Drogon was advertised as being meant to go with Leia. And so I refuse to call Drogon a Leia lifter. Like, Drogon almost never leaves Leia. And the core 3v3 team is Leia, Drogon, and R2. I'm not going to call Drogon a Leia lifter. Fight me on that. That being said, I think we all know where she belongs. She's one of the two queens of GAC as far as I'm concerned. Gosh, what doesn't Leia beat on offense? I actually can't think of anything that Leia doesn't consistently beat on offense. The problem is she's kind of like GLA in that she has so few counters on defense, and that kind of switches between 5v5 and 3v3. You know, like I said, JML can do it in 5v5, not so much in 3v3. I'm sure someone's done it, but it's much less consistent. And so for me, the fact that Leia has, like, I don't know, 3 counters here. One sec. Let me go look real quick. Okay, so here we are. We're on SWGOH, as I love to call it, and we're looking at just 3v3 for now. The core 3v3 team, right? So starting from the top, the best one is Sith Eternal Bane. And that's not 100%. That's 94, right? And I know you might be saying, okay, so what? 94 is really, really good. Yeah, but it's not 100%, which means statistically, your best case scenario with one of the most powerful teams in the game, you still got a 6% chance to lose, okay? And I know that doesn't sound like much, but it's really scary knowing that right now, statistically, there is nothing in the entire game that guarantees you a win against Leia on defense. That's all there is to it. And then we continue going down. Look at what we're staring at here, right? I would argue that Slicker with Darkside Rey is either tied for the top offensive team in the game or is the top offensive team in the game next to Sith Eternal and Bane. And that's air quotes only 92%. And like, that's just crazy, right? The fact that Leia demands some of the best teams in the game to kind of guarantee the win, that's value. I don't care if they have above a 90% win rate. If she demands them to lock in that win, that is amazing value. And it only starts to drop off really quickly after that. The next best Bane, right? The next best Bane team with Bane and Lobster is only 81%. That's a 1 in 5 or a 4 in 5 chance that you're going to beat Leia. Again, I know some people are going to look at that and they're going to go, that's great, dude. 80%, I'm taking my Bane. I'm not. I've seen Bane fail enough times against a Leia for me to say, no, I'm not doing it. I'm either bringing Sith Eternal Bane or I'm bringing Slicker and Darkside Rey. I'm not taking that. My GAC is not going to hinge on a 20% chance that I fumble on Leia and the whole thing flops, right? And then we start getting into the older kind of gimmicky comps, right? You can still do it with Slicker without Darkside Rey, but it's this gimmicky Armorer GBA comp, and it's only 74%, right? Now we're getting down to the point where it's like, yeah, statistically it's more likely than not. But again, I don't like a 26% chance that my GAC hinges on this thing not working. And oh, by the way, if it loses, you just wasted your Slicker. Keeps getting worse, keeps getting worse. The mirror isn't even super consistent. JMK is not super consistent at 72%. I think you see where I'm going with this, right? It just gets worse and worse and worse. And the only teams that stand a meaningful chance are S-tier teams, right? And so I'm done talking about that. That is why Leia is S-tier. She beats pretty much everything in the entire game on offense. I can't think of what she would lose to on offense, aside from a mirror, right? A mirror can go wrong. And on defense, she demands God-tier teams. That's all there is to it. Can't change my mind. All right, and I mean, you see him there. I get it. I get that crapping on Lord Vader is a meme at this point. Haha, Lord Failure, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, man, is he's bad. From a GL perspective, he's just bad. He does beat some of the other GLs. Let's pull that up real quick. All right, so this is a really good example. I'm using 5v5 because I think that's where Lord Vader gets the most value. If you don't know how his kit works, I'm not going to explain it here, but just remember, like, more team members is much better for him, right? Now, here's something I just have to point out. Maul is his lifter, okay? Look at how often Maul shows up. Like, nobody's using Lord Vader without Maul. It's very rare. But even so, with his lifter, look at what people use him on. Tuskens, Great Mothers. I mean, Great Mothers is an S. I would call them an S tier non-GL team at this point. That's probably his best use. We're going to keep going, but CLS, Zori Resistance, Original Night Sisters, Qui-Gon. Oh my God, Qui-Gon. We're seeing it, you know, more of the same, more of the same. DTMG, where's the GL? Where's the GL, guys? What GL are people using him on? Oh, look, Jabba. And don't get me wrong, Jabba's a nice GL to have an answer for, but even that can become kind of inconsistent if your opponent has a good Kersantin and they've modded him well to stop a Lord Vader, which everyone should. But yeah, Gas. I mean, here, look, I'm not going to keep going. The main point is he's not great against any GL other than Jabba sometimes. And the vast majority of teams that people are using him to beat when they take him on offense are not even S tier teams. They're like A tier non-GL teams. You can't sell me on it. That's just not great. It's just not great. It's really bad. Well, let's flip to defense real quick. All right, so now looking at defense, there's a clear trend here. And right, again, I'm not even going to filter out Maul here, right? Because Maul is his lifter. We'll talk about that. It doesn't really change things a lot for Lord Vader. I'm going to be honest, but BKM is the easiest answer. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to give him some brownie points, right? BKM is a really good offensive team. BKM is an S tier offensive team, in my opinion. If my Lord Vader pulls BKM, I'm happy with that. And not everybody in the game has BKM. She's still relatively new, right? So I don't mind that he gets by BKM. It's not nice, but I don't mind it. He gets beat by Bane. Now, here's the thing. You do not need Sith Eternal with Bane. You never, ever, ever need Sith Eternal with Bane. I don't care that this says 96%. I have literally never lost to a Lord Vader with my Relic 5 Bane, and I've never used a Sith higher than Relic 7 with him, okay? So I don't know who's failing this and why, but it shouldn't be happening whether he has Maul or not. So, okay, fine. He pulls BKM, he pulls Bane, he pulls JMK. Well, let's just keep going, though. Ooh, this is where we start getting to, yeah, JML can do it with relative ease. I wonder if there's a datacron here that's kind of preventing this, because Fennec normally has way more than 18% win rate against the Lord Vader team. I mean, you could kind of put him in a category of, yeah, he kind of holds well on defense, but we are getting to a point where, like, everybody has Bane. Lots of people have Bo-Katan Mandalore. Lots of people have JML. You can whittle him down. Let's not even talk about the 2 shots that you might be able to pull off. Even if your JML doesn't win, your JML is going to leave him in a state where your bounty hunters can definitely come in and clean him up, right? So he's even one of those teams where, yeah, it might be a little difficult to straight up one-shot, but you're going to get some kills, and the cleanup is going to be easy, right? So because of that, I'm sorry. And does how expensive they are come into play? If it does, the fact that Lord Vader is the second most expensive GL compared to GLA, okay? Hey, if he performed the way GLA does, I don't even care that GLA is as expensive as she is because of where she belongs in this list. He's so expensive, and he does so little. That's all there is to it. He's D tier, especially without Maul. He's D tier all day long. Let's move on to the Lifter list. All right, so moving on to the Lifter list, this is going to go a little bit more quickly, and you can kind of see why. These are the 4 that I say their lifters are not lifters. Their lifters are core members of their team. And I didn't really talk about this with Jabba before, but Jabba just had his team, and no character has ever been released that has been described as like meant to lift the Jabba team. Jabba is good the way he is and the way he was released. I think that's one of the best things that can happen with the GL, right? Is that they don't need a lifter. But the reality is, again, Commander Ahsoka Tano, she goes with JMK. That's all there is to it. Well, let me look at the release dates on that. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to make sure I fact checked myself. Commander Ahsoka Tano was released before JMK. Okay, she was advertised as a lifter for nope, that's wrong. She was meant to be on the JMK team. She was core to the JMK team, right? So again, that's why she's not a lifter. Leia, same thing with Drogon. We already had this conversation, but he is not a lifter. He is core to her team. Same thing with Ezra with GLA. He is not a lifter. He is core to her team. That's all there is to it. Fight me. Now, moving on again. All right, let's start with the meme. We're going to put Lord Vader up here. Who is Lord Vader's lifter? Maul. Okay, now, first of all, I think this is BS because the Maul-Dalorian team, like Maul, Gar, and ISC, that is such a strong, good team. I hate the fact that Maul doesn't live on that team. I hate the fact that Maul is made to lift Lord Vader because he actually has a use somewhere else. The sad reality, and I'm just going to do it, boom, right? What were we just talking about in the other tier list? I was looking at all the offensive uses, and I said, I'm not going to filter out Maul. I was looking at all the defensive uses, and I said, I'm not going to filter out Maul. Those lists had Maul. Lord Vader was that bad with his lifter, okay? There's nothing else to talk about. Now that we're talking about the lifter list, you already saw all that data. Maul is his lifter. And it's like he doesn't even get anything from Maul. It's like he's horrible without Maul. And he gets promoted to bad with Maul. From a GL perspective, right? Like he's still a GL. A GL's a GL. You know what they say. But my God, he's so bad even with Maul compared to all the other GLs. Moving on. All right, next up, we're going to talk about JML with his lifter. JML's lifter is Jedi Knight Cal Kestis. And yes, there is a chance that a good Jedi gets released. Ezra kind of fell into this bucket. There's a chance that a good Jedi gets released and unexpectedly lifts JML. But the reality is that Jedi Knight Cal Kestis was kind of released and described as JML's lifter, and he really does work best on that team, right? Now, again, let's just call it as it is. Boom. He actually doesn't move for me. These last 3 are the ones who are going to move. JML does not move for me. In my opinion, JML, kind of like how Lord Vader goes from horrible to bad, JML goes from like fine to good. But I still don't even place him, I still don't even want to move him from C to B, because on defense, Jedi Knight Cal does like nothing. I don't know why, it's almost like they coded it on purpose. The way the AI plays Jedi Knight Cal, it's terrible. It doesn't know how or when to swap his stances. It doesn't swap them to the right players or characters. It doesn't armor shred the best characters. He doesn't focus characters that he's supposed to kill. He'll try to insta-kill characters that can't be insta-killed. It's so bad. Jedi Knight Cal actually adds like nothing on defense. And he opens up a few more... Okay, no, how do I want to say this? So like, he makes the Leia counter much easier. He makes it, dare I say, kind of consistent. There's still some risk there, right? And so the fact that the big valuable things that JML can do, like Leia and JMK, Jedi Knight Cal makes them more consistent, but he still doesn't make them like 90% consistent, right? He doesn't make it so that I'm like, oh, thank God I have Jedi Knight Cal. Now I can beat every Leia and every JMK that I come across. No, he just makes them more consistent. And then all the other teams that JML beats that I was talking about before, like say like a Malgus team. Well, he can already beat Malgus without Jedi Knight Cal. Jedi Knight Cal just basically kind of makes it really, really, really easy, like brain dead easy, right? So that doesn't even open up something new. It just makes the things that he was already beating more consistent. And so for me, he just doesn't move. He doesn't move anywhere because it's still risky to some extent to take him against Leia and JMK, and none of the other counters really change. They just become easier. And so that's not enough value for me to say like, wow, he's so much different with his lifter. Moving on. All right, next up, we're going to talk about Sith Eternal. And I'm going to say that Sith Eternal's lifter is Bane. You know, kind of like JML, you could say that like any Sith that shows up is potentially a lifter for him, but they've never really done that. It's never really been advertised that way. And every other Sith who's come out has very clearly been meant to be on their own team doing a very specific thing, right? So Bane is the only character that has been released that was like advertised as a lifter for Sith Eternal, and he came out way after Sith Eternal came out, right? And so Sith Eternal for me is going to move into the A tier. The reality is, you know, Bane doesn't do anything on defense because you can't set two characters on defense. I don't even want to think about how annoying it would be if you could set Sith Eternal Bane on defense, and I'm pretty sure everyone would. But so his defensive capabilities don't move. However, his offensive capabilities absolutely move, right? Sith Eternal Bane is one of the only teams right now that's going to beat GLA with some amount of consistency. It's one of the only teams that's going to beat Leia with some amount of consistency, and those are S-tier teams. Now, I know that might be a narrow range of uses, but just like how I say a team that's on defense who has barely any counters, I don't care if that's their only use being on defense. If there's only like 3 teams in the game that beat them, they're S-tier. That's all there is to it. Sith Eternal is kind of the other side of that coin when he's with Bane. I don't care if the only use cases that really truly open up are GLA and Leia. If you have now unlocked the potential to have one of the only 3 teams in the game that consistently beat Ahsoka and Leia when they're on defense, you get bumped up a tier. That's all there is to it, because that very well could be the difference between you being stuck and losing a GAC or having an answer and standing a chance. So he gets bumped for me. All right, next up, it is the Supreme Leader, Kylo Ren. Darkside Rey. So we talked about it in the non-lifter list. Slicker was good without a lifter. Darkside Rey has made him so much better. And the reality is now he's like the most consistent counter, right? Like if I just don't want to deal with a Rey with Ezra, if I just don't want to deal with GLA, if I just don't want to deal with Leia, it's Slicker with Darkside Rey every single time. Like that's where he does his job. And so on offense, I don't need to talk about anything else. Like everything else, Slicker absolutely stomps when you take him on offense with Darkside Rey. So I'm not even going to talk about the rest of the game. Slicker with Darkside Rey is your like one free I win button. There's like on a bad day, there's a 90% chance that he's going to do what you need him to do. And against anything but the best teams in the game, it's 100% unless you're trying to lose, right? So on offense, he becomes God tier. Now the reality is, she also opens up a lot of possibilities for him on defense. That's just all there is to it. A Slicker on defense without Darkside Rey is not the same. He can get out of control so quickly, and he's one of the teams now, like one of the go-tos for him is Bane, okay? That's a good pull. That's a really good pull. Let's go look at the data, as a matter of fact. All right, so here we are. We only really have 3v3 sample data right now, but there's a clear trend, right? If I just filter, make sure that Darkside Rey is with him, I don't care who the third is, right? Bane, Bane, Sith Eternal Bane, which actually, funnily enough, is worse than just Bane. A Mirror, Seer Malicos, that's strong. JMK, kind of JML, but we've talked about this before, right? Once we get to 75 and below, like, yeah, it works, but I don't love that. That's a number where I go into that battle and I say, I don't feel good about this, right? And then boom, it just plummets after, you know, some of the JML comps. Star Killer, 34%, right? So again, Leia, 21%. Okay, I mean, that's a big deal. And so this is one of those scenarios where on defense, Bane, Sith Eternal, kind of Seer Malicos, kind of JMK, kind of JML, right? And those are kind of iffy. That's like high A tier on a bad day for defense. And the reality of it is, he goes here. He moves up when he has Darkseid Rey. He falls into that category of he has barely anything that beats him on defense consistently, and he pretty much does whatever the hell he wants on offense. So to me, he's S tier. And finally, last but not least, Rey. Now, I don't know if you noticed, I haven't talked about it since I switched lists, but there's a new category at the top of this list that's just called ? And if you use your critical thinking skills, you would recognize that there's only one GL left and there's a new category. So I'm just going to go ahead and put her where she's going to live for me, which is in... So the reality is, Ben Solo is meant to be her dedicated lifter. And in my opinion, if it was just Ben Solo, she would still live in the B tier, maybe the A tier, right? Because Star Killer still kind of walks all over her. Malicos kind of walks all over her. And it almost doesn't really matter the comp that you use prior to a character that we're going to talk about soon. But those are teams that a lot of people have. Yeah, they're pretty valuable, but like, it's not a GL team. They don't have a ton of other just absolutely dedicated uses. They're kind of a jack of all trades team, and they still happen to beat her. So it's like there's a good chance that your opponent's going to have them, and there's a good chance that Rey doesn't really do anything, even with her lifter on defense. Except you never know where Rey is going to be at any given time in the meta because of something else that I talked about in the original list without her lifter. Rey doesn't care about factions. Rey cares about light side. And because of that, and we've seen this in the past, characters that are not meant or designed or intended to go with GL Rey, they can work really, really well with her just because they're light side and just because they're good. And the most prominent example of this right now is Ezra Bridger Exile. Oh my god. It is a hellish team to go up against. To me, it basically demands your Slicker with the Darkseid Rey. It basically demands your Leia. In 3v3, it basically demands Seer, Malicos, and Starkiller, right? The god tier version of that team. And let's just pull out some data to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we are. I'm not even filtering on Ben. I'm filtering on Ezra, right? Because this is what I'm trying to prove the point with. Now, a lot of people use them with Ben, but on a good day, your best option for Rey, Ben, Ezra is Rey, Ben, Ezra. And that mirror has an 84% win rate. That's the best thing that you can do right now. And oh, by the way, you're not going to do that because this is the best team to have on defense right now. So this is not an option for you. So your next best team is Leia, who, by the way, we've already said is probably on defense at 72%. Okay? Let's keep playing this game. Your Leia probably should go on defense. And so your next best team is Slicker with Darkseid Rey at 72%. Okay? So you start getting into some gimmick teams here, but Really, the only realistic answer that at best has a 72% chance to win is Slicker with Darkside Rey. Now, let's just keep going down until we see something that isn't Slicker. Your next best option is that God tier team that I talked about with Seer, Malicos, and Starkiller at a 53% win rate. That's not good, okay? If I told you your GAC was going to hinge on a coin toss, you wouldn't like that. That's not a conversation you want to have. This team is hellish. And Ezra is meant to go with GLA. But guess what? She's the newest GL. More people don't have GLA than do. And what that means is more people are going to be putting him with Rey. And you're going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to come up with an answer to that. And like, the answers just don't exist. Sith Eternal Bane isn't even good against this because Ezra is immune to instant kills. Rey is immune to instant kills, right? And so then you just get left with a Rey Ezra, and we don't even go watch some YouTube videos of people doing GAC where, like, even if it's just a lone Ezra, you just can't get through him. Okay? I'm beating this to death. The whole point is, at any point, some random, strong, light side character can come along for some other purpose, and they're accidentally God tier with Rey, right? And that's exactly what we're experiencing right now with Ezra Bridger Exile. He's meant to go with GLA. Most people don't have GLA. They toss him in with Rey, and she becomes a God tier team. And if you get stuck on her, too bad. As of right now, your entire GAC basically hinges on a 70% coin toss that you're going to be able to beat GL Rey with Ezra with your Slicker and Darkside Rey. This team is a death sentence for anyone who doesn't have Slicker with Darkside Rey. That's basically all there is to it. And so, yeah, I mean, and to some extent, don't get this wrong. I know there's a question mark here. She kind of goes beyond the S tier. If you want to get creative with it, this is S+, right? Because the possibilities are endless and the possibilities are likely, right? For a character to come along to accidentally lift GLA, what? They're basically going to have to be Spectre. They're not going to come out with a random character on accident that happens to be Spectre that lifts GLA. That's just going to be GLA's lifter. Same thing with Leia. I mean, maybe they accidentally release a rebel character that lifts Leia, but it has to be a rebel, basically. And same thing with Slicker. Slicker already got his lifter, but it's never going to happen by accident. It's not going to be like some dark side First Order who wasn't meant to be with Slicker. Oops, he works with Slicker. Not happening. Rey, between now and the day that this game shuts down, has the potential to be an absolute menace with 50% of characters they release. I'm assuming that 50% will be light side and 50% will be dark side, but as long as it's a light side character, it has potential to make Rey become some hellish thing that you don't want to deal with. And so, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. This is my tier list for GLs with lifters, without lifters, and yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you disagree? Do you do whatever? Don't comment. Fight the algorithm. I don't care. I enjoyed this. I hope you did as well. I will see you all next time.